And this character has to now become central to this plot line. And you get those ideas, right? You get those ideas, or you get them like when you're taking a shower, you suddenly go, oh, wait a minute. That's how that should work. So it's a very kind of scattershot process, right?
That was Michele Dominguez Greene talking about her very successful career as both an actress and an author, all on All the Way Authentic. I'm your host, Kevin P. Henry.
Well, now you got a book out. In fact, I wanted to, in my little outline, I said I was going to start with background, but I want to start with the book first and then kind of backtrack a little bit. So the Lost Angels is now officially published. There it is. And
it came out yesterday.
So I know you can only talk about it so much, but I know Amazon.
Oh, no, I can talk about it.
All right, well, just tell me about it. I can talk about it as much as I want. Tell me about it.
The Lost Angels is the second book in a book series. The first book is, I got them all. The first book is this one. And it's called Hollywood Hitman. And the title is okay. We really went around and around about the title of this one with my editor. And then we decided on this. It sort of sounds like it's different than what it is. There are books that are both there. It's a crime series, like a thriller series. Because back in 2024, in 2023, I decided I really wanted to get serious about trying to put these books out and trying to sell these books. And I had two different ideas, two different characters. And I wrote one book that I sold to a publisher in the UK in 2024, and which was like a 4-book series, totally different series, which is these books over here. I'll talk about that in a bit.
Yeah.
But then I got this other deal with a U.S. publisher, with Thomas and Mercer, a few months later for a series. So suddenly I had like all these books to write, right? So these are the ones that have come out. Hollywood Hitman came out about, I don't know, maybe like 5 months ago, and The Lost Angels just came out. And they're set in Los Angeles, of course, right?
Of course.
And it's interesting. The reviews that I get on these two books, I'm getting very, very good reviews, so I'm very happy about that. But people will say, oh, it's not the LA that we think of, or it's not the LA that people usually sort of present. And since you're an LA native like I am, when you grow up there, you have a completely different relationship to cities and transplants do, right? And you live in a different way. You're not there like chasing some like reinvention of yourself, right? You've always been there. You've always been who you are. And so I write a lot about, this all takes place in like East Hollywood. And they're really about, they're serial killers. And each book has a sort of really malignant, terrible, violent serial killer. And my main character is a young cop who's just starting her career. And her dad is a detective who's been like really successful, but very kind of problematic. And they're the kind of guys that I spoke to a friend of mine who I grew up with, who's a lawyer who prosecutes a lot of cases against cops. He goes after cases against cops. And he said, they're trying really hard to sort of weed out that kind of old school cop that bends all the rules and thinks you can get away with everything and thinks like the means justify the end, or the end justifies the means, And I sort of wanted to have a character like that. So that's her father. And they're, two completely different ends of two different poles, right? The same pole, but they're totally different spots in their lives. And so to me, it's really like a father-daughter story in many ways, because they're the central characters. And then you bring in these crimes and these terrible things that happen that they're both involved in.
So I have to ask, given the subject matter, you can write about a variety of things. So what drew you to this type of subject matter?
Well, what's interesting? The overwhelming audience, or when you see any kind of reality TV that's, there's endless things. They're on Hulu, they're everywhere, about confessions of a serial killer, or, these crime documentaries. The overwhelming audience for that is women, right? Which is a very interesting thing because women are also overwhelmingly the victims of those crimes. And I'm not sure if that comes from kind of a voyeuristic thing of wanting to get a sense of control because you're watching it and it's not happening to you. But I'm really driven. I'm very interested in the psychology of that. I'm interested in the psychology of what makes people do like horrible things, you know, what makes them attack people, what makes them kill people, what makes them so. And then I also feel like I feel like there's so many layers of that type of story, right? Depending on how you write it. And like this is a very plot driven genre. And for me, it's really important to me. I work very hard to make sure that every single character in it, even the bad guys, seem like to the reader, seem like and are a really three-dimensional character, you know, that they really have, you get a sense of why they are the way they are, why they do what they do. And I get a lot of, that's one of the positive things I get in my reviews are that there's a lot of emotional complexity in a genre that doesn't always have a lot of emotional complexity because it tends to be plot twist, plot twist, plot twist. And I always want, and this comes with my background as an actress, I want these characters to do things that make sense. The plot has to follow what the characters would actually do, you know, not like I'm going to make them do something that makes no sense just because I want the plot to go in this direction. I can't stand that. So I just feel like it's an arena that kicks up a lot of, and I think even in my primary characters, it kicks up a lot of self-reflection, you know, when you're trying to get inside the mind of a person who is committing these crimes. You have to kind of think like they think. So.
Well, you mentioned a couple of things. One is that, you know, three-dimensional and people are complex because I'm a big fan of like mafia movies and gangster movies.
Mm-hmm.
And what's always interesting to me about the characters are that on one hand, they love their family, they give to charity, they have all of these nice qualities. And then on the weekend, somebody crosses them in business and they'll kill 10 people and say, well, it's just business. You know, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, how do you go from being this loving dad and husband to somebody who just murdered 5 people?
That's a really interesting thing in all the mafia movies that, you know, like Michael Corleone is going to be in church on Sunday with his family, and then he's going to go have his brother shot in the middle of the lake, right?
Right.
Or that great scene in Sopranos where Tony Soprano's with his daughter looking at colleges, and then he realizes there's like this guy he has to take out, and he's like roaming around a college campus, and he says, "I'll be back." He goes off and like murders a man in the woods or something, and then comes back. There's what's really strange to me, and so my friends and I laugh about this. A good friend of mine was laughing about this the other day. The characters that I find the easiest to write, because the structure of my books are that they're third-person books, and they sort of bounce around. Like you go into the perspectives of different characters, right? And that's how that person's story thread is told. So it's not like a just third-person omniscient that lays the story out, you know, boom, boom, boom. So you're jumping from perspective to perspective. And when I write the serial killers or the bad guys or the murderers or whatever, I find those characters so easy to write, Kevin.
Interesting.
It's like sometimes you write and you're like, oh, this is shit. This doesn't have to be right. This is not working. This is not flowing. But when I have to write like the perspective of like the incarcerated murderer that my character is going to talk to up in Coalinga because he wants advice on a cold case, it's like I can get inside that mind of that guy so fast. It just like flows right out on the page. So a good friend of mine said, what do you think that says about you?
Exactly. I'm worried now.
I just think it has to do with, I think all those characters are broken, right? Even the terrible ones. they're just broken. Or they were born that way. I don't believe that necessarily people who commit horrible, violent crimes, I think some of them are just born that way. But there's something so broken inside them, right? Something really broken. And when you write from that person's perspective, you try to find a way to access that, because they think what they do makes sense, right? I remember I had a great acting teacher once who said, crazy people, psychopaths, everybody does what makes sense to them. Nobody does something that human behavior, you don't do things that don't make sense, right? You just don't. That's not the way life is. So they're like Ted Bundy. It made perfect sense to Ted Bundy to do what he did. I mean, when you're working like on a character as an actor, this teacher was like, always remember that. Don't judge your character ever, because your character is doing what makes perfect sense to them. So.
Right. Well, and I've heard that they can be very, very logical, but there's a lack of empathy in a lot. It's like it's like scammers, people who are willing to. They can be the nicest people in one respect, but they have no problem with conning somebody out of their life savings because they don't. Because I think as people, we get all kind of thoughts sometimes, like, oh, my boss is making me mad. I think for a second you might think I would love to just go and slap that guy in the face. But then on another hand, your brain kicks in and goes, oh, wait a minute, Michele, you can't do that. I mean, that's not a nice thing to do. Yeah. So that empathy comes in as if to say, how would you feel if somebody, hit you over the head with a baseball bat? But if that psychopath doesn't have that, then they just go ahead and hit him over the head with the baseball bat.
Yeah, I think honestly, there's a wide range of people, and I think there are people that we don't classify them as psychopaths, and they don't behave as criminals. They're out functioning in society, but there's a shocking number of people who seem to be lacking like a basic sense of empathy and compassion, right? I just think there are. I think there are people who are, we in our lives might say, oh, that guy's I don't want to have anything to do with that person anymore. But I really think that there's sort of like levels of that, right? Mm-hmm. There's like intensities of that. And the really bad ones are the ones who go out and commit violent crimes. But there are other people. I saw this interesting post the other day about how for some people becoming a billionaire affects their empathy, right? Because the way capitalism
I'll never
works.
know.
Yeah, me either. But the way capitalism works is that capitalism breeds this kind of, I've got to get ahead no matter what. I don't care who I step on. I'm going to have to. Somebody always has, it's the way it works. That's business. That's and it was an interesting post. I forget who it was from, but it was like a thing about how it's a system that breeds this kind of all about me.
Well, I wanted to talk about the process because you mentioned how you write. I'm always interested in the process. And I know that you mentioned something about staying up late at night and not being able to sleep and things like that. But so when you decide, okay, I'm going to sit down and write a book, what happens at that point? What's the next step?
Well, I get the idea for the book usually. I mean, literally, I get the idea for the book usually comes from, I get an idea for the character, right? Occasionally I get an idea for the situation and I go, oh, that's an interesting situation. And then I'll build a character into it. And I get those ideas, honestly, when it's not like I sit down and say, I'm going to get some ideas now. I mean, that creative process works. You get these ideas when, for me, it's when the sort of logical, practical, organizational side of my brain is engaged in some activity. Because that is a very sort of overriding side of my brain. And the creative side of my brain is really where I sort of live. But life requires that, you have to be on top of this and that and the other. So when I am engaged, like I'm driving on the freeway, or I'm cleaning the house, or I'm walking the dog, or I'm working out at the gym, and I'm engaged in some activity, that's when I get a lot of ideas. And I'll get like a sort of breakthrough idea and go, oh, wait a minute, that's, I'm like on a weight machine or something. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. And it'll just pop into your head. So once it gets like a certain amount of critical mass in my brain and I start to see that because some ideas are just an interesting idea, and then you sit down and start to think about it, and you realize, that's not going to fly. That doesn't really have legs. And maybe you'll fold some aspect of that idea into some other project.
Mm-hmm.
But once you get it sort of fleshed out in your mind, I do a lot of writing, not sitting at a computer writing. I do a lot of writing while I'm doing other stuff. And I go, oh no, that's a great beat. That should happen. And then you sort of sit down and do an outline. I never really stick to my outline. I always think I'm going to. I do an outline, pretty detailed, but I never stick to it, because once you get into the process, everything changes. And then I know what beats I really want for each character. I know what character beats I want them to go through. And then, of course, I want to go, this genre is like engineering. You know, it's like, I got to put this here. I got to put this cliffhanger here. I got to end this chapter with this kind of tension. So it really is like constructing something. So then you go in and put everything into the construction. But I really wish, my goal is to be one of those people who sits down at a given time every day and says, I'm now writing for like 4 or 5 hours, and that's what I'm doing. But the process of, I had to write 5 books in a year and a half, 2 years, almost, just that, that's 5 books. And with these 2 book deals, and I had tons of deadlines and editors, you know, going, when is the manuscript coming? When is the manuscript coming? When is the copy edit coming? When is the proofread coming? So I was like a crazy person, because my son was still in high school, and he only started driving in the last semester of high school. So I was still driving him to school every day and picking him up. And you know, I'm a single parent, and you're running a house, and you know, you have to stay on top of all the things that a life requires. So I would squeeze in writing when I could. You know, I would just squeeze it in. I can get a couple hours in here. I can get an hour in here. I don't like to work at night because it keeps me up and I don't sleep. But sometimes I have to, because I just don't have any other time. So my goal this year is to be a person who sets a schedule. But it's been really hard for me to do that.
Well, I would think that the creative process like has its own life, and you've done this already, and that you're flexible as to when an idea will hit you. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of musicians, for instance, and back in the 60s, you know, you had these like basically staff writers. I remember talking to the 3 guys that wrote a lot of the Motown hits for the Supremes and, you know, Holland, Dozier, Holland. And it was almost like office hours. They'd go in at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they'd go in a little room with the piano.
They'd write. Yeah.
And they'd write, you know, and then they'd go home and forget about it until the next day at 8 o'clock. But then other musicians I've talked to, it's like they're up at 3 o'clock in the morning at the piano, you know, because that's when all of a sudden they're inspired, or they see something. I remember Boss Skaggs one time. Boss Skaggs saying he has all these napkins because he sits in restaurants and he gets inspired to start writing lyrics. So he doesn't have a pad, so he's got all these cocktail napkins.
It's napkins. Yeah. Because you just don't know when, you know, you don't know when you're going to get an idea. That's the thing, you know. And that thing of like the Holland, Dozier, Holland, and I remember there's that great song on one of Elton John's albums. It might be Goodbye Yellow Brick Road.
Mm-hmm. Which one?
Bitter Fingers, right?
Oh yeah,
and
it's hard to write a song with bitter fingers. Yeah,
it's hard to write a song with bitter fingers, and they just like lock them in a room in the East End and say, write these hits, you know. Mm-hmm. But it's different when you're you know, certainly when you're writing for a publishing deal, and you know you have deadlines, and they want to know what the book's going to be about, and they want to talk to you about it in the process. My editor in the UK is wonderful. Her name is Claire Board, because I have the UK book series, which is this book series.
Yeah.
Features an FBI agent named Emily Ray. She's great, and she and I will get on a Zoom like this, and we'll go back and forth, and she'll say, well, I don't know, what about this with this character? And I'll say, well, what I was thinking was I want to try and develop it this way. My editor in the US is more kind of hands off. You know, she's just like, we talk about what the book is going to be, and then she's like, send me the manuscript. And then you get like the big the big structural letter, or editorial letter, which could be a few pages, it could be 10 pages, where they have a whole bunch of things they want you to think about, change or adapt or whatever, or explain. And, and then you do that big edit. I'm in the process of that right now because my UK book deal, the Emily Race series, added a book. We had 3 books and they've added a book to it. So it's due in the next 3 days, the first draft of the manuscript. Not the first draft. I got the structural edit and I had to do a lot of editing because I read it again and I was like, how did I send this off? How on earth did I send this off?
So what was wrong with it?
Oh, it was just wrong. It was just wrong. It was
just wrong.
It was too scattered. It was too scattered. My bad guy was not, there was like a slew of bad guys, right? And this is another book that's set in LA because my character in that series is an FBI agent and she's based out of the FBI office in Westwood. And so she takes cases that are, all over. Sometimes they're in Palos Verdes, sometimes they're in, Redondo Beach, sometimes they're in wherever. She takes a range of different cases. And this one is this is sort of like about a group of men in like a sort of well-positioned men in Hollywood, lawyers, investment guys, hedge fund guys. And they've kind of had this kind of little cabal, right? Where they have these parties with young girls and, that sort of way that, sort of wealthy men in LA do sometimes, right? And they have these kind of parties and they've kind of put themselves in a position where they can easily be blackmailed because they've done some really sketchy things. And then these very bad guys enter the picture and get into their circle, but those guys know how to use all of that against them. But then suddenly you have like these a series of young women who've just disappeared. And they haven't been murdered. They haven't been found by, there's no bodies found. There's a sense that they're still alive. So this character, this FBI agent, gets involved in this case. And it involves these like very prominent, wealthy men who have a great deal of power, who are then, of course, actually being blackmailed by other people, but they have to find her way into that world. So, but my bad guys were too scattered. They were like all over the place. I read it again after she sent me the editorial letter. Oh, Kevin, I was like horrified. I was just horrified.
Well, you're just having a bad day.
I was like, I really, it's because they got the deal. We got the deal for that book. And I started it. I had just finished The Lost Angels and I had just turned it in. And I was like, oh my God, I'm done. I've done the 5th book. I'm done. I get time off now. I don't have to think about it. Then they added a book to the Emily Ray series. I was like, okay, another book. And my son was getting ready to go in for this really big surgery that had a really long, fairly, not super long, but a very difficult recovery. And, that just took up so much of my focus, right? Like, it took up all of my focus, right? My son had orthognathic surgery where they broke his jaw and reset it, and his jaw was wired shut for 2 months, and he was on a full liquid diet that had to be blended up in a blender. And so it was, it was really hard on him. And as a parent, you're not thinking of what you see your child and they're in, he was really swollen for several weeks. He was on painkillers. He had like 75 stitches inside his mouth. It was horrible. I mean, it was that he was born with a cleft lip and a cleft palate. So he's had, this is probably his 8th surgery. You have a lot of surgeries when you have cleft palate. And this was a big one that we've been working towards for 15 years. And we knew this was coming and we did it. It's great. It had great results, but it's very hard. And you can't think of one other thing. You can't sit down and write for 3 hours. You're just like waiting. Like, do you need something? Do you need Tylenol? Do you need this? Do you need ibuprofen? Do you need water? So I got started on the book late because my concentration just wasn't there. And then I think I just hurried through it. And then I sent in this horrible manuscript that I have to now redo.
Well, live and learn, right? Well, it's a process. That's my point, is that it's not this predictable process how it's going to work. I mean, it's fun being interviewed, or interviewing authors, because I spent most of my career interviewing musicians, but it's the same thing. I mean, I've known musicians that they record something, they think it's great, and they listen back to it and they go, what in the world is this?
Yeah. Yeah. Because you can just like I've been staying up very late because I've been writing at night this week. The nature of my life has just been that I'm like, today I'm doing this wonderful podcast. I don't even like to start working till around noon anyway, because I'm not going to work in the time that I would like to work. So I'll end up working at night. But the problem with that is that your brain gets all like fired up and then you can't sleep. So I slept like 2 hours last night because I just couldn't go to sleep. I didn't fall asleep until like 5 a.m. and I slept till about 7:30. But
well, you're doing really well considering that you've only had 2 hours of sleep. You're very coherent.
I was like, but you get these ideas. So as I finished working at like 1:30 or 1:02 or something, and then you have to wind down a little bit. You can't just like say, now I'm going straight to bed. So I watched some Icelandic TV show on Netflix or whatnot. And then you're like taking your shower and, organizing things in the kitchen. And then you suddenly go, oh, no. I have to lose that in chapter 2 completely. And I have to spin that in a completely different way. And this character has to now become central to this plot line. And you get those ideas, right? You get those ideas, or you get them like when you're taking a shower, you suddenly go, oh, wait a minute. That's how that should work. So it's a very kind of scattershot process, right? And it's you understand that, of course, but it's really hard for people who don't like live and work in this world to understand how anybody does that, right? Because I have a good friend who's a social worker, and she's like, I have no idea. I have no idea how you do that. I have no idea how you can have like your works planned for the next day, and at 2:00 in the morning you're taking a shower because you can't sleep, and you get an idea that spins everything in a different direction.
Well, you're at the mercy of your creativity. And
exactly.
I wanted to, since we're talking about this, tips for writers, because sometimes, I've been writing short stories, but being that I have a film degree, I always tend to think this should be an independent indie film or something.
Exactly.
But your books, did you see them as movies, or do you see them, this is just going to be a book series?
I see my books. I see these books. Like, I have a book rights person who's a very nice woman named Katrina Escudero. She works at NGMT. Very smart young woman. And I honestly see these books, if I were going to develop these books into like the medium of like film or TV, I see these books as like an ongoing series, or a limited series that had 8 episodes or 10 episodes or something, because I feel like I write in a cinematic style, and I definitely do. And I always get that in reviews. They always say, this book is really cinematic. You feel like you can see everything happening. You can see it in your head. And I think that comes from having spent so much of my life working in television and, working with scripts, because I think of the chapters like scenes in a movie. That's how they unfold in my head. Like, I want this scene to accomplish this. And I think of it in terms of, a lot of how I write will describe the atmospheric elements of it, the smell of the air, the sound carrying from something happening 3 houses away. I want to create this atmosphere, and that's just the way I write. And sometimes my editor will say, "Oh, this is too atmospheric," and I'll say, "No, that's part of my signature style." And there's a tone. I feel like if you can get the reader to imagine the scene, that's like the connective tissue between the writer and the reader. You know what I mean? Because once a reader's imagination is engaged, imagining what the character looks like, imagining the scene, imagining, that they can build that, construct that in their own mind, that's what connects the reader to the book. That's what builds the bond between the reader and the book. And if you spell every single thing out for them, then you take that away. So I like to put in like atmospheric elements and describe the scene so a person can imagine it. And then a lot of the emotional sort of experience of the character, I'll write it like in body language, and I'll, because I want the reader to go, oh, that's what that means. Oh, they're feeling this, instead of spelling out how the character feels, right?
Well, it's the old, what is it? Show not tell.
Yeah. I write in kind of a visual style because I want someone to be able to read it and understand from the character's behavior how I want them to visualize that behavior and then make that leap to understand what the character's feeling. So I do tend to write, and I do think that's my background as an actress that makes me want to write in that way, Well,
that's the perfect segue, because I wanted to go back in time now, because I met you when you were probably 13. But
I used to go and see you in those shows at Fairfax.
I remember that. I remember you after the shows. I would see you at the shows, and then later on, of course, I think I saw you on L.A. Law, and then I remember, I think it was a Lifetime movie, and you were like a sheriff or something.
Oh yeah, I was. I did tons of those I did so many of those Lifetime movies where I was, and Harry Hamlin was like the bad guy in that movie.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I had just finished a movie in Montreal, like an indie film in Montreal. And I was so excited to come home. And then while I was in Montreal, I got this other TV movie. It was an ABC movie in the days when they did those, right? And they were like, no, you have to go straight to Vancouver. So you're not going home. You're going to go straight from from Montreal to Vancouver. And I went to Vancouver, and Harry was the villain, right? Mm-hmm. And, Harry and I are very good friends. So it was such a fun thing to work with him, But I did a lot of those. I did many, many, many of those movies.
Well, I remember. I remember my wife would tell me, "Don't even watch these movies," because I would wind up yelling at the TV. Said, "Can't you see he's a psychopath? Everybody can see this guy. You bear, because there's always these women in like these horrible situations that I'm sitting there. Why did you marry some guy you in an ad from the newspaper?"
Yeah.
She says, "You got to be quiet if you don't watch these."
Those are the women in jeopardy. There is some the women in jeopardy movies.
Yes.
And the women always had to be, and you're watching it and you go, the hell, don't walk in that. Clearly he's in there. Don't walk in there. You're trying to get away from him. Don't walk into that closet. But they're sort of structured that way, right? And,
yes,
I had a lot of fun doing them. I did a lot of them, and then so it was a. And I took sort of a break from working as an actress because I kind of had to. When my son was very little, I was right in that sandwich where my son was very little. He had all these, surgeries coming up and over the course of a decade. And my mother's health was very poor. She was in her 80s. She had congestive heart failure and heart disease. And I was in that spot where I was the only one. And you have to manage, parenthood, of course. But then it's almost like a different kind of parenthood when you have an elderly parent who needs a tremendous amount of oversight, tremendous amount of maintenance, tremendous amount of help. And you don't have one bit of psychological space to do anything, right? And you certainly can't be like going on auditions and getting a job that day after tomorrow you're going to leave to Canada for 2 weeks or a week, or, you know what I mean? You can't, because you don't have like a support system there in place in your life to manage, okay, well, I'm going to go do that job and somebody else is going to take my son to preschool or elementary school, or and my son also, because my son was adopted from Guatemala, my son had lived in 5 places by the time he was 2 years old, by the time he came home to me. And it really quickly, I figured out, oh, wait a minute. He needs continuity. He needs the same person every single day. It has to be the same person. And who's the person? It's me. Of course, it's me. It's not going to be a nanny. It's me. It has to be me, because I'm the mother. And I have to be the one to drop him off at preschool and pick him up. And I have to be the one to take him to every appointment. There's no way you can let a child go to children's hospital appointment without their mother, you know, and that's the only parent they have. So I suddenly was like, okay, wait, you're going to have to adjust your life a bit here, you know. So I did. And I don't mind it at all. It was great. There were aspects of it that were difficult. The parenthood part of it was an absolute joy. It's harder, as a lot of people know, it's harder when you're trying to manage things for an elderly parent, because, you know, they don't always want to go along with kind of what they should do.
Yep.
Yeah, you know, you get more pushback in many ways. Like I would say, you get more pushback from my mother in her 80s than I do from my son in preschool.
Yeah, well, I was in that situation with my mom. You know, she's passed away about, well, it's been 12 years now, but same thing. I mean, she's a wonderful person, but she definitely was good to get very obstinate,
Oh, yeah.
and stubborn about things. So do you want to go back into acting, or is it something that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I have wonderful agents. Now. And, you know, it's interesting when I first said I'm going to have to take a little bit of a break, I didn't mean like I'm just like not going to work, but I ended up taking a longer break than I thought, and more of a break than I thought, because there was some part of me, I remember I would like go on these auditions and I would think, I'd be in my mind trying to figure out like, how am I going to do this job? How am I going to make this job work logistically? And then you realize, I'm so really glad I didn't get that job, because it would have been kind of a nightmare. But now, yeah, my mom passed away 4 years ago. And my son's getting ready to start college. So he's an independent guy, and he's got his car, and he drives around, and he doesn't need me to do everything for him. So I'm, you know, I've done a lot of, when I wasn't working in TV, I did a lot of like small theater things in LA. I did a lot of stage readings at the Shakespeare Center of LA. I did a lot of kind of small, interesting, I did a couple of things of like these cool radio plays at the Moss Theater. And they're great. They're really almost like stage readings, because they're not staged like an entire play. But really fun, great actors. I worked with wonderful actors. And I kept busy doing that. Like just back in, I guess it was December, I did a thing of an UNESCO play, and at this place called the Lounge Studio. We did King Ubu, which is the Alfred Jarry play. And we did a stage reading of that in conjunction with The Leader by UNESCO, political theater, you know, and we did a really fun stage reading of it with wonderful actors at the small theater on Melrose, right near Fairfax, Fairfax.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it was, so I stayed busy doing that type of stuff, and that's really kind of fun, you know, it's great fun. You work with great actors, you work on great material. And so I never really like sort of stopped being an actress, really, or even doing stuff as an actress. I just stopped working in television for a little while.
Well, we're looking forward to seeing what happens with the book. And so here's since we have to close this up, this is where you say, you know, for more information, go to Amazon, do this. Here's my website. I mean, however you want people to stay in touch with you, or at least be aware of what's going on.
Got it. My website is michele-greene.com. That is my sort of general website that has sort of an overview of my whole career. I have a lot of stuff about acting and writing and everything on that site. And then I have another site called Michele Dominguez Greene, because I added my micheledominguezgreene.com. And that's all books. That's all books. It's reviews, it's synopsis, it's everything. Because I added my grandmother's maiden name to my pen name, because I just, you know, kind of wanted to have a little homage, you know, to that. It was actually my great-grandmother, an homage to her. But the books are all found on Amazon. If you just look at Michele Dominguez Greene, they all come up. So those are, I have a link tree on my website that links to all my social media. So it has TikTok and Instagram and everything on there. So I'm trying, you know, I love TikTok, so I'm sort of starting to post on TikTok, which is really fun. But yeah, I'm just sort of trying to get the books out there because I have these 2 series, the Emily Ray series and the Cassidy Clark series. But I would love people to check them out. And then I'm trying to post updates of everything that's, going on in all areas of my artistic world.
That was my interview with Michele Dominguez Greene. Very successful career, very successful career as an actress, all on all the way authentic. For more information about go to KevinPHenry.com. This is All the Way Authentic. And I'm your host, Kevin P. Henry.